I'm going to hit admit all, and then Katie, you'll take over on admitting from there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello again, and welcome. Hello, Renee. Good to see you. Hello, Miss Vanessa Heller. Good to see you. Oh, Lester's back. Hi, Lester. So please, if you can, just put, we always say put who you are and where you're from, but we know who you are because it's on the screen. So if you want to just add where you're from in the chat, we love to see that, where everyone's from. We, again, know there's a huge representation from Moreno Valley Unified. I'd just like to give another shout out to the chairman of our board, which is Dr. Martin Rex Kedziora. He always, does a great job of supporting the league and obviously in supporting his staff. And so we're very appreciative of that. We'll get started in just a minute. We're still letting some people in. Shelly, hi Shelly. Matt Story's here. Hey Matt.
Hello.
Hi. Good to see you.
You as well. Thanks.
Thank you. And Aurora's back. It's good to see Aurora. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. Some people are still trickling in, but they'll do that. We want to get you started. We have a full hour of a wonderful session today. So as you know, this is actually the 1, 2, 3. This is the fourth of 5 sessions for our fall conference. I want to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Felipe Mercado. He has served education in various roles over the last decade, such as principal, deputy principal, vice principal, college professor, counselor, and social worker. He is currently coordinator of clinical practice at Fresno State University. And yes, I had to read all of that. I'm sorry I could not have that memorized. But I do want to add that we so appreciate Dr. Mercado being here today. He is, as a nonprofit, we provide professional development events for educators by educators. So it isn't just the staff presenting, is that we actively seek out presenters, and for the most part, they volunteer their time, such as Felipe is doing for us today. So we really appreciate him being here. And like I've said on the other fall conferences, we actually handpicked the presenters for this conference. And we had a wonderful turnout for our summer event. So we asked several of the ones who got the best reviews to come back. So we have asked Felipe to come back here for you today. And so we really appreciate you being here. So you are ready to go. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction. It's truly an honor to be able to give back to educators. I think for me, when I think about being able to give back, I never thought that I would be able to give back. At the age of 14, I found myself homeless and I got kicked out of school, got kicked out of my house, and I didn't go to school. I didn't go to school for 3 years. And so I found myself in continuation. When I finally did go back to school, it was a teacher that changed my life. And, that teacher has changed my life. And I think about it every day when I get into my role and how I can impact students. Today, I know that we have 1 hour together. So I always live by the 4 agreements. I promise to be impeccable with my word, which means that everything I speak from is straight from my heart, is rooted in research. I promise if you ask anything, any questions, I won't take anything personally. I won't make any assumptions, and that I'm always going to do my best. I know that right now we're in a digital world, so there might be some issues that might come up, but know that I did my best to make sure that this hour that I provided to you is very intentional. I know it's the end of the day. A lot of you guys have been at work, and so for me, I want to make sure that your time is valued by me providing the best experience that I can provide. With that being said, we'll get into the objectives of today. Today, we'll be talking about the biggest challenges in education. We'll discover how these challenges emerged and introduce a theoretical and philosophical paradigm shift that will impact equity and mental health in school settings. Before we get started, just so we can have some interaction, I think it's very important to have interaction for me, because sometimes it feels like if I'm talking to nobody because I can't see you guys when I'm in participation mode. If you guys could please use the chat box and answer, what are the biggest challenges for you or your district at the time This could be before, during, or after COVID. So if you could please use the chat box to answer the following question is, what are your biggest challenges for you, your district at this time, whether it's before, during, or after COVID? And we'll read off some of these responses. Student engagement. That's a very common thread. I agree. Student participation, student interaction, engaging all students, social emotional, student motivation, no cameras, wears on the teacher, student interaction, developing relationships with students, virtually, motivation. Yeah. So I see that a lot stems in connection, student engagement, social emotional learning, and really the difference, the challenges we have in the digital world. Teaching all things I used to teach in 6 hours in kindergarten and 180 minutes online. Yeah, that is, oh, wow, that is definitely an issue, 100%. Well, talking about COVID, COVID has posed a lot of different issues. And, today what I want to do is go on a little walk where we can kind of go through the historical perspective of how education has got to where we got to. And so with that being said, I think that it's important for us to look at the trajectory of education over time. So, school started around 1909, and throughout the time as, schools evolved and, we became this type of school systems that we are today, this is the graduation rate over time. What we saw is from the 1970s to about the year 2000 is that we plateaued, is that our graduation rate didn't really go over 72%. In 2019, we had a graduation rate of 85%. The question always is would you get on an airplane that lands 85% of the time? When we talk about our students and some of them graduating opposed to not graduating, we also see ourselves on a global continuum as far as how competitive we are. When we look at the program international student assessment scores, we can see in 2015 that the United States ranked in about 22 and about 26 when it came to reading and science, and that they didn't even get on the list as far as math. In 2018, when we took their mean scores, the United States still fared under all other countries, which was under 20, which was in the bottom 20 in 2018 when they combined science, reading, and math scores. That was where we performed at, right? So when we look at our graduation rates and we look at our students and how they're suffering, we can see how not only does it impact us as a nation, but it also impacts us as far as competing globally. When we start to talk about, why is this happening? A lot of times, well, not a lot of times, I would say in recent times, we've been talking a lot about trauma-informed practices, which has led to equity and social justice and a lot of the movements that we see in schools, and they really talk for social emotional education. I think when we talk about engagement, right, a lot of times our students aren't engaged is because of these findings. What we see is that, adverse childhood experiences such as emotional abuse, parent separation, substance abuse, or physical abuse, and the list goes on, are conditions that students have to go through that actually impact the way that they learn. And so here in California, there was a study that was done in 2018. And what we saw was, about 1 in 4 of our students, were suffering from a parent who was either being separated. Parents were either using substances at the home or some type of emotional abuse. Those students were all coming to school. What that means and the impact for us is that here on where my cursor is at, you can see a brain of an extreme neglect by the age of 3 years old, right? Here you see a normal brain. What that means for us is that a lot of our children who are experiencing trauma, right, they're experiencing traumatic stress. And so rather than them dying and their brain shutting down, this is where the mental health issues come in, is that their brain is actually conditioning them to have hormones and chemicals to prepare them for a tough life in an evil world. So this makes them edgy, hot-tempered, impulsive, hypervigilant. And it's very hard for them to engage because for them, they're trying to figure out, can I feel safe in this class? Now alone in COVID-19, not only can I feel safe in this class, can I feel, safe in my environment? Is my parents going to be separated if they're going through trauma that we just talked about in the previous slide? So as students come into school, their brains, are formed differently, right? And we see them coming into school and they look like, a normal student, but underneath the hood of their head is their brain, and they're some malfunctions that are going on. So when we say, why students can't engage, a lot of times it's because of the trauma that they come with. And that's why, when we talk about mental health and equity, we can't talk about students or how we can have good academic performance without talking about mental health. How that leads is that what we find is the more of those factors you have, such as if you had emotional abuse, physical abuse, and you had a parent that was separated at home, right? That would classify you to have, 3 ACEs, right? Or 2 or 3 ACEs. What we're seeing is with these ACEs, with the adverse childhood experiences, is that it has an impact on how you graduate, right? So if you can see in the yellow, people with no ACEs, right? They have 42% to even a 42% here when they're obtaining their bachelor's or their master's degree. As far as if you had 4 ACEs, your likelihood of getting a bachelor's or a master's drops down to about 12%. So we can see that the impact on trauma not only impacts the child, but impacts the trajectory of them obtaining an education, which leads to us not performing so well nationally. To combat the trauma, over the past 10 years, we've been mapping, suffering globally. And so about over 1 million participants were interviewed by the Gallup World Poll. And what they did was they interviewed about 98% of the countries. And what they asked these participants various questions that really gauged, how they were suffering as this suffering increased from year to year. What they found was that worrying, pain, sadness, and anger were all increasing, minus pain, which decreased in 2018 from year to year. So what this is showing us is that a lot of our adults are coming to meeting our students, and our adults are feeling worried, and they're feeling pain, and they're feeling anger, right? And so are our students. And in the middle of us, right, we're trying to learn and we're trying to engage. And so this is what becomes very hard as far as education goes, because education is very standardized where we have to teach people academic lessons. But what I'm talking to you about today are the conditions that don't allow students as well as adults to be able to get into that space. Here with COVID-19, we can see that there's been an expansion on suffering, right? So we can see that anxiety and sadness and stress has increased in the United States by 33%. So from that previous study, we can see that with COVID-19 that, it's made matters worse, right? And so what we can see is that we need a different approach, right? We need a different approach to education because the approach that we had in the past gets us 85%, doesn't allow us to be competitive internationally with other countries as far as education goes, and students as well as adults are suffering. So what that means is as adults get into the classroom and students get into the classroom, we have challenges because adults have power, right? Students don't have power, but some of us have trauma, right? And when you have people that are in power that have trauma, and sometimes when you have money and we live in a competitive society, it makes it really hard for us to see the trauma that we have, right? And so what I'm pitching here is that as educators, we really need to start having a different approach, right? Where in school systems traditionally, it's all about competition. Who gets the best grade? Who's the better school? Who's the best this? But I would argue that especially for students who come from trauma, that traumatizes them more, especially when they've been in a place where they don't belong. Trauma, when you really look at it, is a lack of connection, is a lack of belonging. And so a lot of times students come from this lack of connection or lack of belonging because of the emotional abuse or because their parents are being separated and their parents are dealing with other issues rather than them. Then they come into school with all these issues, and rather than people understanding who they are, we hit them with academics. And as we hit them with academics, students can't, coexist with the types of guidelines that we're providing with them because of the trauma that they have. And sometimes as adults, we suffer because we have trauma, right? And we have things that are going on. And so what we're talking about here is that as adults, if we don't start to look at our trauma and we don't start looking at having more of a compassionate approach, what happens is we often lead from our ego and we stay stuck, right? And we stay in a place of power and pride where we blame other people, right? And basically the world doesn't help, right? And what we look at the right is, what we need is an approach of someone that leads more from the soul. someone who understands what's going on, someone that, you know, maybe doesn't understand exactly from a cultural perspective things that are going on, but is willing to listen, is willing to forgive when somebody makes a mistake, let alone students who are coming from trauma, who are going to make tons of mistakes. Because what I see, you know, is my quote here is that school is a microcosm of our society. You know, it's a chance for a better future, right? So what we see now is that in schools, there's a lot of bullying. There's a lack of social emotional learning. There's a big emphasis on who's the best person. What do we see in our larger society, right? So, you know, putting all of our deals aside, when we look at the larger society, we live in a competitive world. We live in a world where we have wars and all these different things where, you know, sometimes if you have money, you can bully people. And if you have status, it's okay. And people will forgive these things, right? And if we have a school system that looks at things differently, cultivates educators that have more soul, I believe that our kids will also have more soul and our future will be able to be different as we grow older. I know that I talked a lot, right? But I wanted to provide some context as far as our historical perspective. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually break us up into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. And what I would hope that we could do is reflect on the data that was presented. What are the approaches, policies, and practices in education? I'm actually going to get out of the present so I could copy this in the chat. But what are the approaches, policies, and practices in education that we need to change to really help human beings in education? How can education be reimagined? So I'm going to put us into breakout rooms. I'm trying to do that now. Kathy, were you able to make me the host by chance?
Yep, I did. So you should be able to see breakout rooms in your.
All right, let me see. All right, here I go.
And Katie and I won't be joining the breakout room. So if you get us, just know that we're going to exit right away. So just hit later, Katie.
All right. I was nervous getting this into breakout rooms, but I think we're good now.
Yeah, that was good. It was great information. So worthwhile. Yeah, so important, especially right now.
Yeah, I wanted to provide a little bit of context. I look at everything like steps. So before we get to the highest step, it's building them up, right, for the grand finale, hopefully.
Absolutely.
So I'll do about a 1 minute warning about 4:20 or so, and then we'll give them to about 4:21.
Sure.
I'm kind of a taskmaster, so I try to not.
That's good. Mm-hmm. Does Fresno State have, community wraparound supports?
We do, yes, and now we're starting to increase them because we're needing them now more than ever.
I bet.
And so what we're doing is developing a lot of different partnerships and thinking of things that we never thought of, right?
Yeah, good. Yeah. It's amazing how many college students were hungry pre-COVID, and I'm sure it's way worse now. Yeah, of everyone that's on campus anyway.
And in case you wanted to know that sometimes when you get close to your camera, you tend to get cut off from the nose up, just so you know. So like right now you're perfect.
All right. What happened is my other computer died on me, and so I have my son's computer, and it's on the camera's on the bottom, not on the top.
Yeah.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay. Well, it's good. Yeah, it's good. Just wanted you to know when you get close, you get cut off.
So yeah, then I'm gonna bring them back, and I'm gonna show them a video, and then we'll do one more quick discussion, and then we'll pretty much present until go on.
Yeah,
Great.
we have someone, Juanita Quiros just joined us, and we might need to help her get into a breakout room or something.
Yeah, I just assigned her right now.
Okay, good.
It's so cool because like even though you don't never work something, it's almost like everything works almost the same. So you like, everything's just a click away.
It was pretty
Yep.
cool.
I'm gonna let them know we have about 1 minute.
That's good.
Start closing them out.
If you're done with the breakouts, you'll need to make me the host again.
Okay, let me do that right now. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I got one more breakout room after this.
Oh, then just stay on as a host. You're fine.
Okay.
I'll remind you later.
It'll be right after this. It'll be pretty quick.
Okay. No problem.
There we go. All right. Are we good? All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, and using the chat box, I'm going to go to the chat box. I asked a couple of groups to possibly respond just to their responses. If you guys could please do that, that'll be really great. But I think you know what I really want to touch on, you know, is when we talk about the different approaches and policies that, you know, that are needed, is one that we don't always talk about is, which my thing isn't switching for some reason, is the concept of compassion, right? So compassion is a virtue that not everybody has, and that needs to be cultivated, and it doesn't always come naturally for us, and it's something that we need to practice. I think for me, it was something that I had to learn because, you know, growing up the way that I grew up, compassion didn't always come naturally for me. And if it wasn't for those teachers who really reached out to me and gave me a different perspective, I don't know if I would ever kind of look at life the way that I did, especially being a male, right? In a male-driven world where, you know, status and ego and all these things are so important, right? And sometimes being compassionate and loving and tending to your mental health and being vulnerable are things that we don't talk about. And, you know, I think those are the things that lead to mental health conditions, let alone, you know, in males, but even in females, because a lot of times females live in a world where they feel like they can't talk or they don't belong and they don't have the space. And so with that being said, you know, I want to show you a video. And in this video, it really talks about, you know, we know that we need mental health in schools, but how do we start having the education knowing that we all think differently, whether it's because the way that we look or maybe it's our political values. Whatever it may be, a lot of times when we come to having the conversations that are needed to change practice, they're so hard for us to have. And I want to show you a video demonstrating how people that come from completely different sides have conversations and are able to execute a task. And maybe that could help us have some insight in education.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I'd say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists. We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off their high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you know, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female. Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, okay, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you have any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so. Let me help you.
It's just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I don't want to say attacked. Misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you got this really got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
So
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than argue.
Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
let's go. My chance.
Goodness sake.
You're right, mate.
Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just put a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention, please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You're happy for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working
people,
with you.
yeah. And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit
It's
down and have a
engage, it's
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might pick it up.
All right. So for me, the first time I ever watched that video, it reminded me exactly of education. We all come from different walks of life, students, teachers, administrators, parents, and we all meet. And we all have our differences of opinion. And sometimes what happens is that we use our power and we think that our difference of opinion might be better than the other. And I hope that today, you know, just by understanding the walk of education and where we're at now and looking at why we're talking about mental health and equity, that we can see that the conversations need to change and we need to start having courageous conversations. And so with that being said, the next 5 minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put you guys into breakout rooms for the last time, I promise, for 5 minutes, just really to have a discussion about if we had a conversation like this in education, what would that lead to? You know, will we have differences as far as, you know, what we see in education, you know, and if we did have these types of conversations, what would they consist of and what should they consist of? So I'll put the question in the prompt again, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So here we go, and we'll come right back and we'll join again. Thank you so much. We'll go here. Stop sharing. My computer is not cooperating with me right now too well. Let me put. All right.
No one, I was in a breakout room by myself. Maybe I was a little wordy and people got nervous, but no one joined me in a breakout room. Can you send me to?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me do that right now.
Sorry, I was in a phone call with Southern California Edison. I've been on the phone for over 2 hours waiting on hold.
Oh, wow.
We're all good. We will assign you right now. We're getting everybody assigned right now. Thank you.
Okay, I see it now. Break room 5. So I'm gonna have to catch up and figure out what I'm doing.
That's always the best way, right?
It's not sending me to one for some reason.
I have you in 6. Let me try to move you to another one.
It said put me in 10 and there was no one there before.
Try to move you to another one. Here you go.
Okay, thanks.
Give everybody a 2-minute warning.
It still didn't move her.
Yeah, should we talk with Selena and Gina? Is Gina here too?
Can we do the
To
activity?
make our own little breakout.
There you go. That's awesome. I love the innovation.
Well,
what do you think, Selena? What are your thoughts? I'm sorry.
The
question.
Yeah.
What do we need to do to have courageous conversations? Is that what the question is?
Yes, in education.
In education. I think that first of all, I honestly believe in affinity groups. So I believe that people should be groups based initially on groups of people who've had a similar experience. So basically people who look like them, because I think there's that work to do in a safe space of white folks among white folks, Black folks, Latinos, Asians. And then I think from that's where you get the resilience to be able to have the conversation in more mixed company, because I think people tend to be comfortable being more honest first. I don't want to hold your pain. You shouldn't have to hold mine. And there is pain you have as a white person or as a male or as a cis hetero person. And you should be allowed to hold that pain without judgment and talk about it so that you can more authentically engage. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's big.
Interesting.
Well, thank you for sharing. I don't mean to cut off, but I'm going to close up the rooms. But I think that's huge, because I think that it's a skill. And in order for us to be comfortable with that skill, we have to practice it with people we're comfortable with before we practice it with people we're uncomfortable with.
Right. Because we could create more trauma. If you put all of us in a room together, I might not be comfortable talking about slavery with you because I'm going to be worried about you being offended. You know what I mean? So I think like you just said, Felipe, is very important. Getting that comfort. And that's how I think we could get it. Sorry.
Good point.
Well, thank you. I was just having a really beautiful conversation with Selena, correct?
Yes.
And she was talking about, you know, just how some of these conversations are uncomfortable, let alone when you have them with somebody that you're not comfortable having them with. So for us to start practicing being uncomfortable with people that we're comfortable with, and as we start learning to be more uncomfortable with people we're comfortable with, maybe we start developing that capacity to expand out. I feel like that's really important because, you know, what I'm going to share here next is really a personal story. And, you know, I didn't really realize, you know, the historical context. So I guess for me, after the experience that I had, this is why I'm such a history buff, is, you know, when I got into my principalship about 2 years ago, I knew that I was going into a zip code that was ranked number 10 for concentrated poverty in the whole nation. But I didn't really know what that meant. And so here, you know, is a map that talks about redlining. So in the 1930s, you know, the 93706 zip code, which is also known where a lot of our students at West Fresno go to school at, you know, was redlined. So a lot of those families, which were traditionally families of color, were not allowed to buy a house in other sections of Fresno County, and they were forced to live in a certain spot. What that meant was, you know, I started to work with Every Neighborhood Partnership, and we started to look at data. And what we really started to see is there wasn't a direct correlation, but there was a pretty consistent correlation with when you looked at, you know, the concentration of poverty and you looked at those ratings and you looked at school ratings. What you can see is that schools that got redlined, which you can see here on the 180, a lot of these schools that got redlined here in this section, are all in the red, and they have been traditionally in poverty, right? When you look at our school here in Fresno County, which, you know, is the best, most affluent school, which is Clovis Unified, they're all green. This is their houses, right? This is their level of poverty. And so we started to see that there was a big association. And when we talk about equity at West Fresno, does that mean the same as equity in Clovis? And how do we have equity in mental health here in our county? If we're all, as a county collectively, would you agree that people suffering here are going to impact these people, right? Unless we still live in segregation and redlining and all those times, well, then we can keep people over there. But that's not the times that we live in. And so with that being said, we start to understand that if we don't understand the historical perspective, you know, and we're talking about equity and mental health, that we're not really telling the whole story. Because in order to understand the whole story, right, that child that's coming in, their mom, their dad, their grandparents came from a community most likely. And if they came from a community like West Fresno, what you're going to see is that they're going to earn $743 compared to everyone else in Fresno that earns $901. Their median household income is going to be $26,000 compared to $44,000. They're 45% most likely live in poverty compared to people just in Fresno County, and right, that live at 28%. We have 13.4% of our population that don't have a population, 70% of them that live on cash aid, and people could judge them and stereotype them. But if you were redlined and put at a disadvantage, this is probably why you're seeking aid, right? Because you didn't have the support that everybody else has. And so for me, I think it's really important to talk about the story, because when we talk about trauma, when we talk about suffering, we talk about the student who comes to school like this. And when we talk about equity and mental health, you know, we standardize tests and we give people academic lessons. And those things are very important for people to learn. But at the end of the day, if our kids are learning these things and they're not able to get their mental health in place, they're not able to learn how to co-regulate and become good citizens, all those skills mean nothing because they suffer later on as adults. And what we start to see is that these little babies grow up, right, to become kids in high school and middle school, and they have chronic trauma. So remember, we were talking about emotional abuse, physical abuse, all these different types of abuses, right, that go on inside the home that lead to the cognitive kind of dysfunctions that students have because of the trauma they held. Well, this is what happens to them as they get older. When that trauma never goes away, it's called complex trauma. So when a soldier goes to war, right, and they come back, they're shell shocked. They call it PTSD because they went to war, they came back, they no longer are engaged in that type of war, but there's still things that they hear that trigger them that, kind of create the PTSD, so to speak. For students, they never get to escape the war. They're in war every single day. Their parents tell them stuff. There's emotionally abused. They come to school. They're not good enough. And so all of this stuff, as they're starting to grow up, it starts to take a part of their existence, and it really affects the whole child. And so that whole child eventually becomes a member of our society, and that person could, kind of go depending on how they orientate, right? Because if you orientate as a male and you have a certain ethnicity, a certain race, and a certain class, right, you might be able to get through this trauma, right, because of money and certain things. But if you live in West Fresno, right, and you don't have access to healthcare, to quality, chances of you escaping this is very, very difficult. And so for me, that's why it's very important for us to talk about, mental health in schools, as well as talk about equity and talking about the whole picture. Because when we talk about equity in the whole picture, what we have to really talk about is how do we help a community, right? So what we start to see is this individual here at West Fresno, not only do they have to deal with, all the different, ACEs that they have to deal with, they also have to deal with the community. In their community, there's poverty, there's discrimination, right? There's a lack of opportunity, there's poor housing and quality. That's where all the Section 8 houses are. That's where all the rehab houses are, right? So when we talk about equity, the types of students that are coming to us, right, aren't the same type of students as Clovis. And sometimes what we try to do in education is we get really clever and we try to replicate what Clovis is doing. But there's no way that we could ever do that, because what Clovis is doing and what they have is way different. Their resources, their clientele is completely different. And so I think that when we talk about having the conversations, these are the conversations that we need to have, right? Because for me, as I started to have these conversations, I was able to start to get my district to start to see things in different perspectives. What we do traditionally in education is we look at, knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, right? Because that's what we are, we're schools. But what we know from Maslow's basic needs is that kids will never learn. They'll never reach self-actualization if they don't have food, if they don't have security, if they don't have a sense of belonging, if they don't have high self-esteem and they don't feel confident, if they don't get success. So if you take that student from trauma who's constantly being abused all the time, doesn't have enough money, their parents don't feel like they're good enough and they're always trying to kind of compete. They come into a school and maybe they're trying to compete and try to do good and they're not doing good. Their sense of security at home, as far as their love and belonging, isn't being met because nobody's giving it to them. Their self-esteem, no one's giving to them at school. And this kid feels like, I don't really belong. And gangs have a really good kind of functionality because they really understand kids' basic needs, right? And not just gangs, I'm just using that as a microcosm, but when a kid doesn't have basic needs, gangs come in and they say, hey, here's some food, here's some protection, you're down, you're this, you're that. So gangs have really mastered the art of basic needs, so that way they can get that individual to be down for the cause or whatever it may be. And I think that schools could learn a lot from that mentality, because if we learn how to tend to children's basic needs and get their mental health conditions right, we can have them right for the occasion, right? And in this occasion, it would be for school, right? What would be best for the better society, and how do we get kids that? But in order for us to do that, we have to get their basic needs met. If we don't ever get their basic needs met, kids grow up and they're damaged and they become adults. And a lot of times as adults, right, because we live in the society that we live in, we're not going to seek mental health treatment. We're not going to say that things are wrong with us. We're going to continue moving forward and acting like things never happened. And we're going to pat ourselves and put band-aids over ourselves. But deep down, we're suffering and we're struggling. So I think that the best thing that we can do as adults is really understand how our basic needs were met and how we reached where we got, or how our basic needs weren't met and how that had a big hindrance on where we could have been. And how do we give that back to somebody who doesn't have those basic needs? Or how do we reshare, the type of basic needs that somebody has given us, so that way they can reach who they are? As we started talking about basic needs, there's a big dialogue, MTSS, all across California, right? And, as I started looking at the framework, one of the biggest things that I saw was that everybody always went to the academic piece, right? So they went straight to the middle. for me, being, having a social work background and being a counselor and really understanding, the trauma part really, right? And the neurobiology of how people grow and how they learn and the neuroscience of it, I really started to want to emphasize that, we really need the social emotional as well as the behavioral components in order for academics to be held up. So the reason I created the trapezoid is to demonstrate that without the behavior and social emotional pillars, that the academic goals that we're trying to reach in education will probably never be reached. For some, those that have the healthy brain and have all the good things, and those that are resilient enough to make it, but there's still that 15%, and those that do graduate that don't make it in school that we're talking about. And that's about 30 to 40% of our population if we really start to break it down by the numbers. On top of, pitching that not only do we need social emotional learning and the behavioral pieces to combat the academic piece, we need some foundational learning. A lot of times we talk about equity, we talk about mental health, but what does that mean, right? So for me, what I'm trying to encourage districts, right, and people to have conversations around is, if we're about equity, what does that mean to us? What is the definition of that? And what are the behaviors of a teacher who has equitable actions, of an administrator who has equitable actions? Let's stop creating concepts and let's start creating detailed, actionable behaviors that we can measure and hold each other accountable. So when someone isn't being equitable, we can say, hey, how come you're not doing this? It's exactly like a PBIS chart when someone's coming down the hallway, and the expectations are to be like this, and you tell the student, hey, what are the expectations, right? That's what we need to start doing as adults. And I think that we haven't done that enough. A lot of times we get into the work, and the work usually is in this academic piece. And what happens is that the social, emotional, and behavioral piece, we want to do the mental health, but we really don't know what mental health means. We talk about trauma, but if we're really trauma informed, when kids get in trouble, does that mean that we're going to be punitive, or are we going to be trauma informed? I don't know what the answer is, but we need to have that conversation because every organization is different. But in order for us to get to where we need to go, we need to start having these conversations and stop making things that are so gray, make them more black and white by having the conversations and getting the outcomes that we're trying to get. With that being said, I knew I had to take a different approach, being in a school system that was ranked number 10 for concentrated poverty, and especially being in elementary school. For me, those babies, that were going to become adults and become, teenagers one day were important because I felt like I knew what they were coming to me with. I knew the environment they were coming from. So rather than making excuses, rather than saying that it's their parents' fault, I just started to think about what kind of infrastructure can I create to offset whatever trauma I can. So I started looking at local universities. I started looking at our community colleges. I looked at Kaiser Permanente. One of the biggest things I would say is the Every Neighborhood Partnership, which really started to bring together all of our community-based organizations, the police department, a lot of different agencies that worked within our zip code. And I mean, they would start donating. They would bring volunteers. We would have Saturday events. We'd link up with Comcast and paint our school. I mean, our school was outdated. It looked ugly. And, just Comcast coming and donating paint, getting the volunteers to come out, having them have a sense of belonging, feeling like a community. These were the things that I felt like were going to change the way that, our kids came into school and experienced education compared to the ones that didn't. Right. We also started to make partnerships with, churches across town that, had a lot of money and wealth and power and status because of the people that went. And what we started to do was start to have conversations so we can start breaking down the barriers of, how do we start having conversations and create equity if we're really trying to create equity, right? And bringing in mental health services, right? As far as we can come into your house, you can bring them here to school, having a mobile clinic, just having a gamut of resources that we wanted to provide to our students. We started to team up with Centro de la Familia, which was the advocacy group. We realized that a lot of our parents, 1 in 4 of them came into were surveyed to be undocumented. We had a 70% Latino population. So with that being said, there was a lot of resources that they didn't know. And so we knew that we had to have a different approach in order for us to educate our families. And the way that we were approaching students and families in the past, it wasn't working, right? And what was happening is that we were having a lot of students that weren't weren't performing. We had a lot of teachers that didn't feel really, really good. But what was happening is that teachers were dealing with things that were beyond their capacity. Once we started to realize and understand the different issues that were going on, and we started to kind of look at this pyramid and start to develop hygiene kits for us, right? Because that was something we needed, because some of our kids came and people made fun of them and they wanted to fight. And just different things like these were things that we needed to infuse in order for us to have better outcomes, right? And I'm proud to announce that, we were able to decrease our suspension rate by 60%. Our parent engagement rate went up by 45%. We didn't have a PTA meeting. Now we have a PTA meeting. We have a lot of conversations now as well in our school site council and ELAC meetings with, teachers who might not be Hispanic or Hmong. And we have Hmong and parents and Spanish parents in that same meeting having conversations. Before we got there was a lot of segregation. So, when I talked about putting the students in the middle and trying to find the most success for students, teachers couldn't deny that they wanted to find the most success for students, and neither could parents. So as we started creating projects and different experiences that we could collaborate, even having, off the front, which was a bike giveaway, we would have, kids start to ride their bikes, and we would try to give, and then you would get teachers that would be animated, connecting. So just trying in different ways, even attendance, right? We had this attendance game because we saw that our attendance was at 92%. We're able to increase it 4%, having an attendance game, right? Where if your class shows up 100%, you get an A right on your door and you get to spell attendance. And, I don't believe in competition all the time, but I think that sometimes competition is good when we're motivating, right? And, it was good because kids wanted to come to school. And we started to find out that sometimes in the elementary school site, it wasn't that our kids didn't want to come to school, it's that mom and dad were going through stuff. And that's why they weren't coming to school. And so they would come and tell us these stories of why they weren't coming to school. And that's how we would go and find these resources. And so the more proximity that I had to my students and my parents, the more information that I got. And there was a lot of times I didn't have the answers, and that's where collaboration came from, because I don't know mental health all the way. I might not know how to advocate for parents, but I know that we need advocacy, right? I know that we need mental health in our community. I know that we need a family resource center that has wraparound services and informational booths and talks about community events, and we need bus tokens and all of these things. And so this is the infrastructure we created for our school because we felt like it was important. A lot of times, in education, we talk about, academics and the students aren't performing. And so just in honor of that, I wanted to kind of show you this funny, kind of cheesy video to talk about that. Sometimes it isn't always about the academics. Sometimes it's about something else. So let me show you this video and we'll go on with the conversation because we got about 8 or 9 more minutes.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things...
So I show you that video because a lot of times in education, we look at academics and we try to fix the problem. But I think if we just sat and listened and understood the way that the lady is talking about in this video, we would get a lot further. And I think in mental health, when we talk about mental health and equity, that's what we need to start doing, is we need to start listening to the people that we serve. and start having the conversations, because a lot of times they don't know how to have the conversations for themselves in order to advocate for themselves, or to even understand how to get them services, right, to take care of themselves. And a lot of times we act as the gatekeeper. So I find myself a lot of times talking to parents that look at mental health as a stigma. And I find that I utilize my relationship to help demystify what they believe and maybe get them a little bit more receptive to maybe go into that mental health situation that they had stigma towards, because they see that, you know what, this person's here and he's listened to me and he's never done anything that's going to hurt me or harm me, and all he really wants to do is support me. And you know, if the experience goes bad, his door is open and we can have a conversation. But if it goes good, man, I can still come in and have a conversation, but now I have other places and more support. And when we talk about trauma, that's really what it is. It's about having support, right? And when we talk about mental health, it's about, you know, when you have different issues or challenges, it's about having the support that you need. And so with the last slide that I have, you know, I want to thank you all for being here and really just inspire you, you know, by the Steve Jobs quote. You know, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs, this oops, my thing's here, my thing is covering this, the square holes, the one who sees things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that we can change the world are the ones who do. And I think that collectively, that's how we're going to change the world, because I can't do it with myself. So I thank you for all of your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy with the last 5 minutes, and if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Thank you for that. Do you happen to have the link to your the slides? Is it possible that
yes,
if we could share that in the chat with everyone? Also, we do like to send it out tomorrow when we send out a copy of this video. We will send obviously the link to the slides. So for anyone who didn't catch those, that would be great. Thank you so much. And again, if I didn't see any questions coming up in the chat. If anyone does have a question, feel free. You can either just raise your, I think, is anyone raising their hand? Excellent, great presentation. Thank you. I think here we have one. What's a good starting point?
A good starting point as far as?
I'm not sure. Salman, do you want to expand? Do you want to turn on your microphone?
Yeah, hi there.
Hi.
Hey, Felipe, I appreciate the presentation. It was really connected with me. It's very heartfelt. I could see the passion you got, man. It's really great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just a starting point, just in general, just, you know, I have, I share a lot of this where I see the kids and, you know, there's so much more that I have inside of me. And I'm like, I feel like, you know, it's restricted. Like, oh, I wish I could teach this or talk more about this. So, I mean, as far as starting point with, you know, SEL activities or what to even teach, like, what's a good point to start with? Is it, I need to sit down and decide where I want to go with what I want to teach? Or is it, I got to start like a group talk with colleagues or take it to admin? Like, what do you feel?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on you and what you're comfortable with, right? So a lot of times people had told me that mindfulness was a good starting point. But for me, it was hard for me to do mindfulness because it was just, I didn't find the right person for me yet. So for me, I really started taking it on a different approach where I took students who were willing to, you know, have different types of approaches and talk about compassion. And what I did was I developed a group of students, right? And we started to kind of interact during, and now because of COVID, we're not able to do this, but interact during, you know, their non-structured time. And as they started to interact and build that capacity, I had them become the ambassadors and speak about it. Because it's so much more powerful when the students are talking about it, let alone when you're looking at the students who are traditionally not doing so well in school. And all of a sudden now they're talking about compassion and wanting to do well in school. So I think, you know, really looking at students who are willing, that you have, you know, relationship with, to really try to develop their capacity. If there's something that you feel like you're good at, right? Like say you're really good at mindfulness or having, you know, community conversations, I would even start there where you're, you know, having these conversations or getting students in the space to have different practices, right? That they traditionally don't have. A lot of our students, you know, I'll talk myself and my brother as an example, you know, we have a lot of impulsivity because of the trauma that we have. So we can't sit still, and it's hard for us to be calm. And so those mindfulness, those breathing techniques really help us calm down and really help us be in a different space. So, I know that I didn't really answer your question, but it just depends. And if you want to talk about it more, I could definitely put my email in the chat and we could talk about it more and talk about more of a specific way of how you would be able to roll that in for yourself.
Oh no, man, that was definitely helpful. I appreciate the answer, man.
You're very welcome.
Great. We just have a request to change the permission on your slide presentation so that everyone can access it.
Okay.
If we can do that. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or just turn on your microphone. Let's see if we can't get those permissions changed. And just as a reminder, so our concluding session will be on Wednesday. It is with Ben Cogswell. It is remote learning, engaging, assessing, and activating awesomeness at all levels. If you haven't yet seen Ben Cogswell present, he is wonderful. So that will be Wednesday at 4 p.m. and you should all receive email reminders about that. They are asking for your email address too, Felipe, if you'd like to put that in the chat, if you don't mind sharing that with everyone, I think that would be great. And we will get a copy of the video along with the slides in case you missed it out to everyone tomorrow. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dr. Mercado. We really appreciate the session and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.